Hi there, and welcome to Out There Cryptid Podcast. I'm your ghost host TJ, and in 2011 and 2012, a family in Indiana possibly became the target for demonic entities. Many eyewitnesses would corroborate their story, and their home would become known as the Demon House. Today, we'll be covering the Ammons family's story, as well as the events and information detailed in Zach Bagans' documentary, Demon House. Let's dive in. Hey everyone! Starting March 1st, our Patreon will be undergoing an overhaul. We will be adding 2 new tiers. Tier 1 will only be $1, and you'll get access to ad-free episodes and early releases. Tier 2 will still be $5, and you'll get access to special episodes, the first of which releases in March, and exclusive livestream events, where you guys can watch movies with us or watch me and Trevor force Josh to play horror games. Our third tier is for those of you who want to be ahead of the game. For $10, you will get access to new shows once they're ready to release, and a physical copy of my upcoming book, Dear Editor, if you so choose. We hope this change is better for everyone, but we are always open to your feedback. Don't forget, pre-orders for my book are available now exclusively for Kindle ebook, so if you're looking for a new murder mystery with cryptic ciphers and a Zodiac killer to catch, Dear Editor is for you. We'll jump into the dark events of the Ammons haunting right after this. Before we get started, it's important to note that some of the names in this story have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. In November of 2011, Latoya Ammons, along with her mother Rosa and her 3 children, moved into their new home. It was cozy and modest, the perfect place for the family of 5. If you imagine a family home, what you imagine probably isn't too far off. The children, 12-year-old Macy, 9-year-old David, and 7-year-old Eric, were all excited to move into their new home. The Ammons family settled into their new home quickly, finding comfort in their new situation. That comfort, however, only lasted about a month. Everything started when the family returned home one day. All seemed normal except there was a swarm of black horseflies buzzing around their front porch. When the family realized, they were confused. While horseflies aren't foreign to the state of Indiana, they don't regularly appear once colder weather comes, especially in December. Latoya and Rosa tried different ways to get the flies to leave, but nothing seemed to work. More would return faster than they could kill them. After trying time and time again, one day the flies just stopped appearing. They vanished without any explanation. The Ammons were confused by this. Not only was the flies' initial appearance baffling, their disappearance was just as odd. The Ammons, however, weren't going to dwell on it. For them, it was a strange event and nothing more. Little did they know, it was just the first omen for what was to come. Not long after the incident with the flies, the whole family began to hear strange sounds coming from the basement. At first, it was subtle bangs and creaks, sounds easily mistaken for a settling house. Though the sounds were most common at night, the family would also hear them during the day. The Ammons were able to ignore the sounds well enough until Latoya and Rosa began to hear footsteps on the basement stairs. Latoya and Rosa would listen as boots marched up the stairs and reached the door. The first few times, that was it. They'd just stop. Not long after, though, once the heavy footsteps would reach the door, they'd hear the sound of the doorknob turning. However, the Ammons never actually saw the doorknob move. They just heard the sound. Though the family never saw anything, Latoya began to lock the basement door every night before bed just to be safe. Despite the precaution, the noises continued. Eventually, Latoya and Rosa would be woken by the sound of the basement door slamming. When they examined the door, they found that it was still locked. The phantom footsteps wouldn't be the last sounds to disturb the family. Late one night while Rosa watched TV, she heard the sounds of dogs barking outside. The barking was nonstop, and they seemed to be right outside the back door, pawing and scratching to get in. Rosa got up to see where the dogs were, but when she opened the door, the barking suddenly stopped, and there were no dogs anywhere near the house. The sounds finally culminated when Rosa woke one night to the sound of footsteps walking about the house. Rosa built up her nerve before exiting her room and slowly searching the house. Eventually, she reached the living room, and what she saw terrified her. A tall shadow man was pacing around the room. Rosa could hear the footsteps and floor creaking beneath each step the figure took. She froze, unsure of what to do, until finally she flicked on the light to confront the man. The living room light came on and the shadow man disappeared. Rosa had clearly seen the figure one moment, and within a fraction of a second, it was gone. Rosa knew she wasn't just seeing things, because left in the figure's wake were muddy boot prints, exactly where the figure had been walking. After Rosa's run-in with the Shadow Man, things began to escalate. For weeks after, LaToya's children would begin to have strange physical symptoms. They would become sick more frequently, and bleeding from the nose and mouth became more common than anyone would hope. While trying to explain away all the strange occurrences, LaToya began to seriously wonder if her family had become the target of a paranormal attack. She began to reach out to local churches and spiritual leaders. However, most who received her calls possibly assumed that she was just making everything up. One, however, did suggest anointing the doors of the house in oil. LaToya drew crosses on the doors and windows of the home, hoping it would stop the recent events. LaToya wasn't satisfied with this, though. She reached out to a pair of clairvoyants who agreed to take a look at the house. While wandering the home, the clairvoyants came to the same conclusion. The home wasn't just haunted, it was infested. Each one stated that they felt at least 200 demons within the home, and suggested that the Ammons simply stop living there. That wasn't an option for the Ammons, though. Money was tight, so they didn't have the funds to move elsewhere, and they didn't have any family that could house all 5 of them for an extended period. Because of this, one of the clairvoyants gave them the advice to protect the house and themselves from demons. Taking this suggestion seriously, LaToya built a religious shrine in the basement of the home, as well as continued to anoint doors and windows with oil. For a little while, this seemed to help the Ammons, but of course, things would soon change. Early morning on March 10th, 2012, the Ammons had many friends and family over as they mourned the passing of a loved one. The Ammons' children had long been asleep in their beds. While the family mourned and conversed in the living room, the whole family heard Macy as she screamed for her mother. LaToya immediately jumped into action, rushing up the stairs with Rosa right behind her, and behind Rosa, other members of the family followed. LaToya and Rosa stood in shock for a moment as they saw Macy floating above her bed, seemingly unconscious. The 2 Ammons women moved closer, allowing guests to move into the room. Unsure of what to do, everyone in the room began to pray. Slowly, Macy began to float back down to her bed. Once she awoke moments later, she was asked what had just happened to her, but she couldn't remember anything. After that night, many of the guests who'd witnessed Macy's event refused to ever return to the house. This was the moment LaToya realized her protections weren't working, and that this was becoming more than just minor bumps in the night. LaToya was convinced that Macy had been possessed. LaToya began to take more drastic measures, anointing her children with oil crosses on their foreheads before school. That was, if they could even make it to school. The hauntings had become so prevalent and scary that the children would often stay up all night out of fear, and would be too tired to attend school. LaToya eventually reached out to a friend to help rid the house of evil entities. LaToya and her friend began their ritual at the altar LaToya had constructed in the basement. LaToya lit a bundle of incense and flipped to a passage in her Bible. She waved the incense in the air, making a cross, and began reading Psalm 91. The first two verses read, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In Him will I trust." LaToya would repeat Psalm 91 over and over again as she walked around the house. The smell of incense filled the home as LaToya continued making crosses with the smoke. Once she and her friend were confident they'd cleansed the whole house, they took a sigh of relief. When the Ammons went to bed that night, nothing disturbed them. No noises or shadow figures woke them from their sleep. All was finally calm within the home. That was for just 3 days. Once the 3 days of peace were up, the family began to act strangely. Members of the family, particularly the children, would break into creepy smiles and stare at the others. When they would speak, their voices would be uncharacteristically deep, nothing like how they'd speak normally. Seemingly, each member of the family wouldn't realize when it happened to themselves, but they would obviously notice it in the others. One day, LaToya found 7-year-old Eric talking to an unseen entity inside of his closet. Not long after this, LaToya witnessed Eric fly out of the bathroom, as if someone much larger had thrown him. Another occasion had Eric and David riding in the car with their mother and another relative. They stared blankly into nothing. Then the deep voices returned. David and Eric spoke to each other about death and how they were ready for it. In an instant, the boys were clawing at each other. LaToya noted that it seemed that they fought with more ferocity than they normally had. They seemed to be out for blood. They tore at each other, not letting up. Eventually, LaToya pulled the car over, and the two adults pulled the boys away from each other. Within moments, the boys returned to normal. However, this would become the Ammons' new normal, as the boys would continue entering strange trances before attempting to rip each other apart. Macy wasn't exempt from the new strange occurrences. Instead of being lifted from her bed, she began to feel like she was being pinned to it. While being pinned, she said it felt like she was being strangled. Some nights would be too much for the Ammons, and they would have to pull money from their budget to stay in a hotel for a break from the fear and chaos. 5 months into the paranormal events, LaToya began to wonder if her children's behavior was more medically based instead of spiritual. She took them all to see the family physician. LaToya explained the children's behaviors, and the doctor took detailed notes. He began to wonder if the family was suffering from joint hallucinations. Then, Eric and David had a violent outburst. They screamed at the doctor in their unnaturally deep voices before lunging at each other. LaToya and Rosa managed to hold them off of each other, but it only made them more violent. After a hard struggle, the family watched as Eric flew through the air, violently hitting the wall. Right after this, both Eric and David fell unconscious. The doctor couldn't get either boy to wake up, so he ordered another hospital employee to call 911. Multiple ambulances and 7 police officers arrived on scene. Both boys were carried into the ambulances and taken to the Methodist Hospital of Gary. Before the boys woke, LaToya suggested to hospital staff to anoint the boys with olive oil, but they laughed off the suggestion. Once they were awake, David seemed to be fine, but Eric continued his fit of rage. He jerked and screamed with all of his might. He was so strong and violent, it took 5 men to restrain him. After a while, Eric finally calmed down. The doctors were unsure of what to do, but felt it was a good idea to call Child Protective Services. Doctors examined each member of the family and determined that none of them had any physical injuries. The CPS agent assigned to the Ammons case was Valerie Washington, a seasoned worker with the department. When she arrived, she spoke with doctors, and they told her that it didn't seem physical violence was a factor. Valerie, as well as a nurse, entered David's room with LaToya and Rosa. Valerie began interviewing LaToya, asking about recent events and such. Then, the room fell silent, as David, who had been holding his grandmother's hand, walked slowly towards the wall. Everyone in the room watched as David began to defy gravity, walking backwards up the wall, across the ceiling, and not stopping until he reached the other side of the room. He did this while still holding Rosa's hand. Valerie and the nurse ran out of the room, unable to comprehend what they'd just witnessed. They decided to inform the doctor on duty, who then followed them back to the room. As they entered, they noticed David was sitting in a chair as if nothing had happened. The doctor, who hadn't witnessed the event, asked David if he could recreate the trick. David seemed confused and didn't know what the doctor was talking about. The doctor insisted that David try and walk on the wall again, and although he tried, David couldn't do it. A few days later, Valerie Washington called LaToya with bad news. CPS deemed that it would be safer if the kids were temporarily taken out of LaToya's custody. The only way to have her children returned to her was to get to the bottom of the haunting and cleanse the presence for good. While at the hospital, word about the Ammons' strange occurrences had begun to spread. On April 20th, 2012, an unknown employee had heard about the events and made a call to a local priest. Father Michael Maginot would be the first and only spiritual leader to hear the Ammons out. 2 days later, on the 22nd, Father Maginot arrived at the Ammons' home, eager to interview LaToya and Rosa. Maginot noticed the boot prints that came from the Shadow Man. And that would be the only strange thing he noticed, for about 4 hours. Father Maginot asked the Ammons women to explain in detail the hauntings that they'd experienced. As LaToya and Rosa began telling their story, they all noticed as a light in the bathroom began to flicker. Maginot slowly rose from his seat and approached the bathroom. He could see the flickering lamp as he entered, but as soon as he did, it stopped. As he stepped out of the bathroom to return to the women, the light began flickering again. He looked at the light, then back to the women, and said, "It must be scared of me." That was the start of the strange happenings around Father Maginot. As he attempted to question the Ammons, the blinds in the kitchen began to move. The father couldn't find any wind or reason for them to be moving. Then, after continuing once more, LaToya began to have a splitting headache. Father Maginot had an idea. He retrieved his cross and placed it on LaToya's forehead. Immediately, she began to seize uncontrollably. Maginot pulled the cross away, and within moments, LaToya was back to normal, though still having the splitting headache. Maginot did this 2 more times, and each time was the same. Maginot was convinced that something had a hold of this family. He walked the house, splashing holy water in each room and blessing it. He told the Ammons that it wasn't safe to stay here, and they listened. They temporarily moved in with a nearby relative. After leaving, he sent a request to the local bishop requesting permission to perform an exorcism. Maginot had become convinced that whatever plagued the home had housed itself within LaToya. A few days after Maginot's interview, Valerie Washington met LaToya and Rosa at the home for a routine check-in. However, Valerie wasn't alone. Fearing the events at the hospital, Valerie asked some police officers to accompany her. While checking out the house and questioning the Ammons, none of the officers or Valerie witnessed anything major. However, officers would complain about their equipment batteries dying while within the house. Some said they'd even just replaced them. Others noticed weird figures within oddly distorted photos of the home. One officer picked up an EVP while recording the visit that seemed to whisper the word, "Hey." Although likely not connected, another officer said that the motor in his driver's seat of their patrol car gave out and nearly caused an accident. While Maginot and Valerie visited the house, 2 child psychologists were visiting the children at the hospital. The psychologists were there to question the children and determine if they had undiagnosed mental illnesses. Stacy Wright interviewed Eric, while Joe Schwartz interviewed Macy and David. Both psychologists came to the same conclusion. None of the children had any mental illness. However, both had noticed the same behavioral changes in each child once the topic of demons was brought up. Each child would become confused and begin to take back or change their answers to questions. They would become agitated before seemingly becoming possessed. The psychologists determined that this behavior likely stemmed from their mother's superstitious beliefs. LaToya was told she could receive her children if she moved the family into a new home, put all of her children in therapy, and stopped mentioning her beliefs in the paranormal events. The next CPS checkup was on May 10, 2012. Valerie Washington was not present this time as she refused to step another foot in the house. Instead, Samantha Illick took her place. While walking through the basement, Samantha noticed a mystery liquid dripping from the ceiling. While searching for the source, a firing pain shot through her hand. Her pinky felt broken. The pain was immense, and she, as well as those with her, watched as her pinky turned completely pale, as if the blood flow was totally cut off. Once she noticed her pale finger, she began gasping for air and her heart began to race. She said it was like she was having a panic attack. Quickly after this, she ran from the house, opting to wait outside while the officers continued the search. During their search, the officers noticed oily buildup on one of the bedroom's Venetian blinds. They wiped it down, assuming Rosa must have rubbed something on the blinds. They left one of the officers to stand watch at the door, while also leaving a Q-tip wedged between it. Sometime later, they checked the room again, and sure enough, the blinds were covered in the same strange material, and the Q-tip was never moved. The officer on watch said no one ever came near the bedroom. Maginot, who was present for this checkup, reported all these strange happenings to the bishop. Despite all of his first-hand evidence, Maginot was unable to convince the bishop to bestow the rite of exorcism. By the end of May, Father Maginot believed he'd found a solution. Being unable to perform a church-sanctioned exorcism, Maginot had found another ritual that could be performed without permission from the bishop. The ritual worked similar to an exorcism, though lacked the effectiveness and strength of an officially sanctioned exorcism. Despite this, Maginot believed it could help the Ammons, and LaToya agreed. When the day came, Maginot was met by LaToya, Samantha, and 2 police officers. As the ritual began, Samantha and the officers felt nervous. They described it like there was another presence in the room watching them, but they couldn't see it. After 2 hours, the ritual was unsuccessful. Maginot mentioned to LaToya that knowing the demon's name helps significantly when warding them off, and suggested that LaToya begin searching for the demon's name. The very next day, both LaToya and Maginot called each other with good news. Maginot told LaToya that the church had finally approved a church-sanctioned exorcism after hearing about the failed ritual. With this great news, LaToya gave Father Maginot a long list of possible names for the demon. Sometime in June, LaToya met Maginot in Merrillville, a town not far from Gary. They met at Father Maginot's church. Maginot knew he'd have a better chance of expelling the demon while within the house of God. Maginot explained that during the exorcism, he began going through LaToya's list of names. There was a while where nothing happened, but then, when reading off one of the names, Maginot noticed that LaToya began to twitch. The demon's name hasn't been given to us publicly, but Maginot had found it. After figuring out the demon's name, Maginot would swap between praising God and berating the demon. Maginot noticed that when God was praised, the demon would have no reaction. It didn't seem to care. When it was chastised, however, LaToya would begin to convulse and fight back. When she did this, Maginot would shout his prayers, but after hours of fighting with the demon, they had to stop. The demon hadn't been expelled, but Maginot explained to LaToya that its connection had certainly been weakened. This was just the first of 3 exorcisms LaToya would have to endure. LaToya and Maginot repeated the same steps 2 more times, and after the 3rd, Maginot felt that LaToya was finally cleansed. LaToya herself even said that the pressure and stress of the past few months had just been lifted off her shoulders. LaToya wouldn't stay at the home long enough to verify if the hauntings had truly stopped. After her exorcisms, she and Rosa found a place in Indianapolis and moved out. Meanwhile, Valerie Washington quit her job as a DCS worker. In the documentary Demon House, which we'll discuss in a moment, Valerie said that she left the DCS because she couldn't handle seeing children suffer, and that seeing David's show of defying gravity traumatized her, because she couldn't find any explainable answer. Samantha Illick didn't get out scot-free either. Within just 30 days of visiting the Ammons home, she suffered 3rd-degree burns from a motorcycle, broke her ankle, 3 ribs, and her hand in 3 separate accidents. Samantha herself has stated that she isn't sure if her incidents are related to the Ammons case, but that her friends certainly seem to think they are. In November of 2012, LaToya would finally be reunited with her children. All was good for the Ammons until the Indianapolis Star wanted to do a story on the family. They reached out to family members, police officers, DCS workers, hospital staffs, and local priests to find those who witnessed the Ammons' strange events. The story would become national news. Then, in just a few short days after breaking, the home's final owner would buy the house without ever seeing it. But who would buy a supposedly haunted house for $35,000 without ever seeing it? Well, none other than Zach Bagans himself. More about the Demon House after this. Before we discuss the Demon House documentary, I need to address some things. Zach Bagans has gotten himself into hot water before about if his show Ghost Adventures is legit or not. Since Zach is foremost an entertainer, everything within his show and this documentary must be taken with a grain of salt. That being said, you can't talk about the Ammons haunting without also mentioning the documentary Demon House. A week after purchasing the property, Zach gathered a crew and they made their way to the supposed Demon House. After entering, Zach received a text from a friend of his. The friend, Chris Fleming, is a psychic, and he warns Zach about an entity that may be within the house. Part of the text reads as follows: "Saw visions of a demon being very, very large, almost like a hulking type figure. Horns turned back and centurion feet. Be careful. Adam thinks it's an 8 out of 10 on the demonic scale, below Satan himself when it comes to possession, like one of the generals." This text piqued Zach's interest. Just a week before Zach heard about the home and bought it, he'd had a dream. He says in this dream he was a spirit showing other spirits that he could move a cup that sat on a table without touching it. Then out of nowhere, the room shifts and he's in front of a door. As it opens, a 12-foot tall, goat-like demon steps through the door and opens its mouth. Black smoke begins to billow out, and Zach was forced to inhale it. When Zach woke from the nightmare, he realized it hurt to breathe, similar to when someone suffers from smoke inhalation. After getting acquainted with the home, Zach decides to attempt to talk to LaToya. In the documentary, Zach says he's been in contact with the Ammons multiple times. According to Zach, the Ammons said they'd return his calls, but again, according to Zach, they never did. He wanted to speak to LaToya so badly that he and his team managed to find a separate news story that LaToya was interviewed for and pulled her address from that interview. When they arrive at the home, they are greeted by LaToya's brother Kevin. Zach asks politely if he can speak to LaToya, but Kevin says LaToya doesn't want to talk because Zach has been inside the house, and LaToya is afraid something may have attached to him. Instead, Kevin says he'll talk to Zach. While riding in the team's car, Kevin tells Zach about when LaToya and her family would stay with him during the haunting. Kevin says that on a few occasions, LaToya would bring the family over to stay a few nights. While there, Kevin would hear noises like something or someone was being thrown. He also said that one time while the kids were all in the living room, Eric started chanting. When Eric stopped his chant, David began chanting. Then when David stopped, Macy began. Kevin also confirmed with Zach that the kids' violent outbursts towards each other were real. After Kevin's interview, Zach tells us that LaToya wouldn't let her brother back into the home because he spoke with Zach. Her fear being that if a dark energy attached to Zach, then it may have transferred to Kevin. Zach then interviews Father Maginot, where he shows him police footage from the house. Zach managed to get police footage of a short interview with LaToya within the home. In the footage, she explains the strange behavior of the children. Macy would complain about hearing voices and beg her grandmother to make them stop. She also described how one of the boys began acting possessed, rolling his head and eyes around erratically and stating, "I've been here long enough. I came to kill. I'm going to kill now." Zach had also managed to unearth another piece of footage where Valerie Washington, the family's first CPS worker, admits to an officer that the wall-walking event did in fact occur. Next on Zach's interview list was Captain Charles Austin. Captain Austin told Zach about the time officers assisted CPS in taking the 3 children. Upon entering the house, the first officer saw Bibles, crucifix, and burnt candles all over the house. Once all the officers arrived, no one believed LaToya's story, but they each had a strange feeling. Chief Brian Miller explained how one of the basement doors changed positions multiple times during the visit, without anyone having stepped foot in that other room. Captain Austin then tells Zach about his police radio malfunctioning after leaving the Ammons. A dark voice came through and shouted at him. Captain Austin had a dark feeling about the basement stairs. He'd noticed upon his first visit that the entire basement floor was concrete, except the portion directly beneath the stairs. It was just dirt. Eventually, officers would excavate the floor and discover some rather strange items underneath. A heavy metal object, candy wrappers, ruined socks, a small cooking pan's lid, a press-on fingernail, women's white underwear, a comb, and a political shirt pin. The officers assumed the area was a portal to hell, but Father Maginot believed that necromancy was once performed at the site. Later in the documentary, Zach is approached by a former resident of the house named Mika. She agrees to come inside and begins telling Zach about strange noises that she used to hear. When asked about the basement, she informs Zach that she's never actually been down there. Zach asks if she and her children would like to, and they agree. Once in the basement, Mika feels someone kick the back of her leg and begins asking her son if he was the one who did it. He of course denies it, and upon playback of footage from Zach's crew, you can see that Mika's leg buckles without anyone touching it. Zach and the crew set up a small makeshift altar after the family leaves. Once it's finished, Zach begins acting strange. He grabs Jay, one of his crewmates, and begins yelling at him. He tells Jay to get out of the house before slamming him into the wall. Once outside, he has to ask Billy, another crew member of his, what just happened. Zach's memory was too foggy for him to remember. If you thought we were nearing the end of people who've been affected by the house, think again. A home inspector who'd visited the house nearly died when a tree narrowly missed his car while driving home. He was choked by an invisible force while in a bed, similar to Macy, and soon after his visit to the home, he developed cancer. Just the day prior to LaToya's second exorcism, Father Maginot was on a bike ride. He noticed that every person he passed stared at him with confused looks. Before he knew it, he was laying on the ground just off the bike path. He'd had an accident with himself. When he looked the bike over, the seat was bent at a 45-degree angle, which, according to Maginot, shouldn't have been possible from the minor accident. 2 days after Captain Charles Austin spoke with Zach, he ended up in the ER after a nasty fall outside a restaurant. The fall had left him unconscious and with a bleeding head wound. And not long after that, he responded to a home invasion where he was shot. Luckily, Captain Austin survived. Again, only 2 days after visiting Zach, Mika's daughter Erica attempted suicide. After the news reached Zach and his team, Zach had a crew member quit on the spot. 3 weeks after that, however, Mika, Erica, one of Erica's cousins, and Father Maginot all met together. Zach asked Erica if she remembered visiting the demon house, but she seemed unsure. When asked about the fight she'd had with her mom, she couldn't remember anything that would make her so violent. She'd screamed at her mom, threatening to kill her. But when Zach asked about it, she didn't remember any of it, not even her suicide attempt. Mika told Zach that while the family was in the hospital, Mika's other daughter noticed a large scratch on Erica's back. Mika came to check it out and saw a large number 6 scratched into Erica's back. After everyone meets, Mika's family decides to have an exorcism done on Erica and allows Zach's crew to film it. During the ritual, Erica falls forward, seemingly unconscious. Father Maginot believes that this was the moment the demon left her. Slumping forward like that is not something Erica normally did, nor did she remember doing it. After news of Erica's suicide attempt and exorcism made headlines, one of Zach's beloved friends began trying to contact the spirits within the demon house. Debbie Constantino, Zach's longtime friend, eventually believed that she made contact with an entity and even captured a dark voice that seemed to say, "Something's wrong," or "Let them out." Sadly, however, Debbie wouldn't escape the house's curse. Just a few months after making contact with the demon, Debbie and her roommate were murdered by Debbie's husband Mark before he took his own life. A former neighbor of the Ammons approached Zach wanting to speak. She told him that at least 5 people had died while living in the house, including a young boy that passed in the back room. Zach then invites Dr. Barry Taff, an expert in reading and detecting electromagnetic and geomagnetic fields. For those who may not know, it is believed that a spirit's energy can be affected by the magnetic fields around it. Not only this, but spirits can radiate electromagnetic energy. It's believed that similar to how we convert food into energy, spirits convert existing geo and electromagnetic fields into usable energy for themselves, exerting it in the process. While checking the basement for electromagnetic activity, Dr. Taff gets a strange reading. His electromagnetic field meter begins pulsing with magnetic waves. He finds that the source isn't where he'd expect, like the walls or ceiling. The source is floating near the center of the room a few feet off the ground. After Taff points this out, Zach begins having shooting pains in his temples and a burning behind his eyes. He leaves the room, and as his pain subsides, his emotions begin rising. He becomes very sad before turning very angry for seemingly no reason. Returning to the room, Zach's camera crew begins having interference with the mics. Zach punches his fist into his hand, and just as he does, the EMF meter spikes with energy. Dr. Taft begins to wonder if the energy is emitting from Zach. He holds the EMF meter up to Zach, and sure enough, it spikes to its max. Taff asks Zach to move away, and as he does, the electromagnetic energy fades away. Taff continues checking the spot where Zach had just stood, but there's nothing. In an interview after the fact, Taff explains to Zach that his personal electromagnetic field was 8 to 12 million times the amount a regular person usually gives off. Before leaving the basement, Taff and a camera operator both hear what sounds like a dog growling in the basement. Shortly after hearing the noise, Taff becomes affected by the house. He walks around confused and dizzy before Zach finally leads him upstairs. Once there, Zach steps outside to get some air while Taff stays inside. The camera operator, Adam, follows Taff as he touches a wall and heads towards a back room. The same back room the little boy had passed away in. When the pair pass the bathroom, Adam catches something on his camera. A black mist can be seen stretching out of the bathroom before disappearing. Taff leaves the back room, peers into the bathroom, and says, "It's really bad in there," before claiming that the room is making him feel sick. After Taff leaves, Adam begins acting just as strange as others who've been affected. He lies on the floor when he feels sick, becomes confused and distant, then finally wanders into the basement alone. Adam would get worse once they returned to the hotel. Adam puked up blood in Zach's bathroom, saying he felt like someone was stabbing him in the stomach. Once he was done, he left Zach's room to return to his own. He opens the elevator door and screams Zach's name. Zach and his film crew grab their personal phones and begin filming as they search for Adam. While waiting near the elevator, the team sees Adam burst out of a nearby room before he slams into the elevator, screaming about wanting to return to the house and taunting the demon that's affecting him. Jay, who's known Adam for years, said that this behavior is totally out of character for him. Once the team calms Adam, they return him to one of their hotel rooms. Adam explains that when he opened the elevator door, he saw a tall goat man standing behind it. According to Zach, he hadn't told any of his crew about his dream with the goat man. Adam proceeds to tell Zach that the creature doesn't want Adam. It wants Zach. Mid-conversation, Adam pauses, claiming that something is touching his hand. The crew claims that the area around Adam is freezing, and that an EMF meter spikes to its limit. Adam becomes increasingly agitated, screaming at whatever is affecting him. Over the next few days, Adam's behavior would become more erratic and worrisome, and Zach would eventually fire him. While everything with Adam is happening, Dr. Taff had returned home, but he hadn't escaped. He was rushed to the emergency room as all at once his organs began to shut down. He explains that his prostate, kidneys, and bladder had all been infected, as well as other organs that began to shut down. Doctors were confused as to why such a healthy individual's organs would shut down to begin with, but even more confused at how they all began to do it simultaneously. After all this, Adam refuses to talk to Zach or about the house, and even got 666 tattooed on both of his hands, and Dr. Taff still has health complications to this day. After seeing how the house affected so many people, Zach wanted to do one last thing. The end of the documentary sees Zach board himself up inside the house and stay the night. Once locked in, Zach has strange things happen. First, he hears a woman's voice emanate from the kitchen. Zach then lies on a bed in the back room, filming the open door that leads past the bathroom and into the living room. After he sets his camera on the bed, the sound of footsteps or objects being moved can be heard. He sits in silence a moment, before a demonic growl cuts through and he jumps back onto the bed. He tells the entity to go away before grabbing a nearby object and screaming for it to back up. The camera on the bed becomes unfocused, but we see a large black shadow walk in front of it, seemingly from the hallway, before Zach chucks his held object towards it. Zach says that after he witnesses a black mass emerge from the wall, his eyes begin to burn. He walks around the kitchen in pain before moving to the living room and throwing the TV. Once he's out of the house, he notices that his eyes begin to cross. He develops diplopia an eye condition that permanently affects his eyesight. Zach saw multiple doctors, but none of them could tell him how he developed the condition. Zach now has to wear special prism glasses daily to compensate for his vision. After everything, Zach demolished the house but kept parts from it and dirt from the basement. He claims the reason was so the house couldn't affect anyone else, though that has been disputed. We'll talk about the possibility of all of this being false or a hoax right after this. When the Ammons story broke, the big question on everyone's minds was this even real? Many of LaToya's relatives, such as her stepmother, have come out and said that they believe the whole thing was made up. Even Charles Reed, the Ammons landlord, said he didn't believe any of what the Ammons said, but with how many trustworthy people claim to have seen something, he can't be sure. But that's just the word of a handful of people. How do you explain away all of the strange events around the family and those who visited the house? The home inspector from Zach's documentary recorded high levels of carbon monoxide within the home. As humans, we are not built to breathe in carbon monoxide. Inhaling high levels can result in confusion, dizziness, and hallucinations. Those three things alone can explain what most people experienced when inside the house. The constant confusion, seeing weird figures, becoming unbalanced on their own feet. It could also explain the sudden feeling of nausea multiple visitors felt when stepping inside the property. Though an extreme and unlikely explanation for this, it could also explain how a group of friends and family all saw Macy floating above her bed. So, how about all the noises the Ammons heard? Well, the house was old, and everything started in the winter. The cold weather would have caused the home to constrict, tightening all the wood of the house, causing constant creaking sounds. The rhythmic sound of boots, however, can't be explained this way. But I need to note that many of the Ammons' experiences were just that, the Ammons' experiences. No one else was there to confirm their claims. So what about David's act of wall walking? It's entirely possible that this could have been rehearsed. One thing that's always pointed out when this happened is that David never let go of Rosa. It's believed that this was an elaborate acrobatic stunt that had been practiced multiple times over before they perfected it. Valerie Washington, as well as the hospital staff, were all outspoken skeptics, but a stunt like that sure made them question their beliefs. Most who were affected by the curse, however, weren't skeptics. Many of the officers, as well as Father Maginot and Zach and his crew, are all believers in the spiritual or supernatural. Their belief in the supernatural could affect how they explain away events. For example, Maginot's bike accident. It's very common for someone to fall off a bike, and the seat's odd direction could have been just from landing awkwardly. Captain Austin's strange radio malfunction was probably just nearby interference. As for his bad fall, it was winter in Indiana. It's common for people to fall on slippery surfaces. Being shot during a home invasion isn't surprising either. Gary, Indiana has one of the highest crime rates in the country, so it's not out of the ordinary for that to happen. So what about Adam's meltdown? As I've stated before, Zach and his team are first and foremost entertainers. Therefore, the drama of a crew member having a meltdown would be great for ratings and publicity. Finally, what about the home inspector, Samantha Illick, Dr. Taff, or anyone else who met misfortune after visiting the house? Well, just plain old coincidence. Who's to say Samantha wouldn't have had her accidents regardless of her visit to the house, or Dr. Taft's health problems? We'll probably never know. The last possibility to touch on is that the Ammons set everything up as a hoax. We know now that the Ammons sold their story to a company that turned the story into the movie The Deliverance. It's possible that this was the Ammons' goal the whole time: create a sensational story, sell it, and make money. It's also possible that the goals started much smaller, with the family just wanting lower rent. The prices of haunted houses are typically much lower than regular homes. The Ammons weren't wealthy by any means, and may have created the story to cause Charles Reed to lower their rent. But then there's the big question that throws a wrench in the whole hoax theory. Why would LaToya risk losing her children just for the small chance of making money or lowering the house's rent? That's a question we may never know the answer to. The Ammons haunting is one of the most documented cases of demonic possession in history. With countless witnesses and victims, it's no wonder why the home came to be known as the Demon House. So, what do you think? Are the spirits of the Demon House really out there? Be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Out There Cryptids for episode posts, updates, and more. Join our community on Discord where we and even you guys share the strange things that happen all around us. The link can be found on our Instagram. And if you're loving the show, consider supporting us on Patreon. As a patron, you'll get exclusive perks like no ads, bonus episodes, special events, and new shows when we finally release them. Be sure to rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as it's a great way for others to find the show and enjoy, just like you. See you next week.